All right, folks. When I was recording the lecture video, I got interrupted by a phone call, which unfortunately was somebody in my family getting into a car accident, and I had to go kind of tend to that. And then when I came back and restarted the recording, I forgot to share my screen, so I didn't capture any of the stuff I was doing. So this video is basically recording the information that was missed, basically, in that one lost video. What I had basically been talking about was the display property and how that's used, and how um, these display elements basically are useful for getting things on the screen. And I was doing examples of that. So I'm kind of picking up from there and going into the positioning thing. Now, the thing I should also say as a preface here is I had already lectured on this stuff and I already had built the code relative to it. But one aspect of putting things on the screen is being able to control how and where it sits on the screen. And there's a CSS positioning element that basically is listed as position, with the most common one really, or the one that's default without listing it. So like if you don't list position relative, you are really actually defining it as static. In other words, the HTML element is going where it's supposed to go on the page based upon what you designed it to do, right? So this is where it's supposed to go, and it's static. There's no reason to formally declare this unless you're changing it dynamically from some other positioning approach back to static. Otherwise, there's no reason to code it. The one that we end up using from this section probably the most is really this relative positioning one, which allows us to take some sort of an object and position it relative to where it normally would go in the flow of the document. And what I did on my pages here is on my, I think it was my code test page, I created a number of divs, right? And here's the 3 divs I created. They're just boxes with text in them. I named them box 1, box 2, box 3, and then I created styles in my style sheet to kind of deal with those boxes. And you can see what I did here with those. All of them got a width and a height of 100. I gave them each a different background color so we could differentiate them. I put a little padding on the inside. And then what I did is I took box 1 and I put it up on the screen. And I think it's probably pertinent to kind of show this stuff. So let me see if I can, I should open up a new window actually for File Explorer. And that one can go away. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the work I was doing here just so you can see what I did as part of the explanation, so you're not kind of like hanging there in the cold, basically. We'll go to the code test page here. And so this one's box 1, box 2, and box 3. And the point I was making with the code is when you're putting this stuff on the screen, normally the stuff sits in a certain spot. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove a couple of things here. And I'm going to do this in the form of comments because I added this stuff in as I was coding before. And I'm using CSS commenting techniques to kind of remove the code that I added, and then I'll add it back in. And I'm trying to figure out which code to remove here. All right, because it looks like I did a whole bunch of stuff, and now I'm going to kind of undo it and redo it, but I have the code already written. So right now I just have 3 boxes. They have widths, heights, colors, and padding. And so if I save this and go back to the browser and take a look, this is what I get. I get 3 boxes that sit on top of each other like this because they are what we call block level elements. They fill the whole width of the container they're in. The next item that appears in the code appears below it. When I start to think about some of these weird things, for example, I started by removing or adding a position relative to the second box. So in other words, relative to where this should be sitting, I want to adjust the top position by 0 pixels. So the top's not going to move. But I think the first time I did it, I maybe set this to, I don't know, 10 pixels down. And then left was maybe 30 pixels down. Right, so I'll save that. Let's go back and take a look. And then notice how it moved down and over, but notice the other effect that it had. And I'm going to change the top number by a little bit. Let's make that something like 40 pixels and refresh. And notice it not only moved from where it's supposed to be, but now it's overlapping the item that came below it, right? And how is that good? Well, maybe if you're trying to get that effect, it's good. But it shows you something about the normal document flow. Just because you're moving one object from where it's supposed to be to somewhere else doesn't mean the objects that follow it are moving too, right? Now, if I want that box to pop forward, then I start to use this value called the Z index. And I did this little demo earlier tonight too, so I'm going to kind of try to recreate it. Suppose you have a computer screen, and on your computer screen, you want to apply these positioning elements. So we're moving this one down from the top, like was 40 pixels, and over from the left by 30 pixels. And the point is, like when we do like math, our origin point in mathematics is down here, right? And x's get bigger going that way, right? That's the x. And y's get bigger going the other way. But on a computer screen, our 0 point is actually up here. So x's still get bigger going that way, but y's get bigger going down, right? So that's important to note. There's also kind of like this perceived, third dimension. I'm trying to sort of draw it in there. That's the z-axis, in which the plane of the screen is 0. And as I add value to that z index or z parameter, it's coming forward from the screen. So I can kind of make that bottom box appear in front of this one by very simply adding a z index value to it, which I was attempting to do down here. So I would remove this comment, right? So we'd add a z index. I'm giving it the value of 1 because the screen itself is 0. So I just need a number bigger than 0. And then I'm also going to apply the position relative command, because otherwise z index won't work. Right? So both of those are needed. So it's positioning along with the z index. As I then refresh, now you'll see the bottom box is sitting in front. Why? Because I moved it forward in perceivable three-dimensional space, right? So we're kind of creating a layering effect, and that can kind of be cool if that's what you're going for. But if you have content inside those boxes, it probably isn't cool, by the way. The other thing that happens when we're doing positioning like this is, as you might imagine, it's like, oh, if you can make your divs that small, could I maybe move like let's say this one up here? Right, sure, let's try that. The way that we do that is I can take that first box up here and add a float command to it. And the float command allows it to kind of break out of the flow of block level constraints, right? So in other words, I'm going to move this object, allow it to float to the left side of the screen. It's only going to occupy the space that it needs, right? And then box 2, because it has room, will now be able to move up into that space. Now I'm going to go ahead and just save this as is and then refresh, and you'll see what I mean. So it moved up, but it's not very pretty, is it, at this point? Part of the problem is that I'm also doing these floats in weird spots, and then I have this like top positioning set to 0, right? Or had it set to 40, so that's pushing it over. And then if I want this to really sit next to it correctly, because I'm doing this relative positioning stuff, I have to like find a value that works from the left margin of the screen, so I can kind of move it over there, for example. And notice the text kind of falls out of the box, and that's not pretty either. Some ways to fix this, by the way, is I could comment this stuff out, right? So I'm not doing any positioning commands on it. And watch what happens on the screen here with that. I'm not even sure where it went. It just kind of disappeared from the screen altogether. But what it's trying to do, and we're not like seeing it on the screen, is it's trying to scooch in next to this one. All right, I'm going to get rid of these comments here. And maybe this isn't the best thing to do, but whenever you start floating things and objects start fitting in spaces where they wouldn't normally, and I suppose I should check that it came back. There it is. Um, at some point, you have to like, one of the objects below has to get rid of those floats, by the way. And then we use this command here, which helps to do that, which is the clear both command. So it's clearing left floats and right floats and all that. So as I save this now and refresh it, the normal page flow is restored, right? And it kind of was already. So that wasn't really a very dramatic demonstration. In the old days of like kind of working with this stuff, this is a lot of how we did layouts, and really up until recently we do a lot of layouts this way, and it can get very confusing. There's a lot of mechanics of like worrying about like how the stuff is placed on the screen and pixel counting and oh my god, why did it go there kind of stuff. And you play with it quite a bit. The positioning elements do utilize these top, left, and right positioning things, right? And that is the position from which it would normally sit relative to that corner. So if I use a top command, it pushes it down from the top. If I use a left, it pushes it away from the left. You can also use bottom and right. And what I did is, for at least the students in the class, is I demonstrated, for example, and you notice how that one's like still stuck there, the example of like a fixed element, right, where it sits on the screen, and no matter what I do. And I think what I did before is I added a whole bunch of paragraphs into the code here just to make it scrollable, right? And so if I run it, right, and you see how it kind of overlaps, and if I had enough, and I can just really paste in a bunch more, right, and it got to the point where it's scrolling, that this just never moves, right? And that may be an effect you want, may not be an effect. I'll come back to absolute. Here's another one that's kind of interesting. Notice how sticky works. It basically gives you an element, and as you scroll, eventually gets stuck to the top of the screen, and you can scroll past it. You do see this a lot with like navigation or advertising elements or things like that. So that's kind of a pretty simple one to apply if you look at it here, right? They just create a div, they position it as sticky, right? They do a little bit of positioning, they just really didn't change its position any, put a little padding inside the box, and that's really about it. But that's kind of a neat effect. I like that one sometimes for navigation. The other one that I usually advise students to kind of avoid, by the way, is the one that is absolute. And we talked about this pretty extensively in that, like you ever go to a website and you land there, maybe it's a newspaper site, and all of a sudden they pop up an ad in front of you. And people in the marketing business call those AP divs, right? So absolutely positioned divs, commonly, that are filled with ads and are right in front of your content. Absolute should be used with extreme caution, right? And I would not advise, outwardly that you always use that. And I did kind of demonstrate here also the display none, because it was really good after I showed people how this worked to just completely get rid of it, frankly, right? So here I set up a position absolute, and originally I set the top to something smaller than this, but so top 100, left 100. It's got a Z index of 66, so it's going to sit in front of everything on the website. And let's just go take a really quick look at what that does here in the browser, if I can even find it. Let's refresh and notice, boom, it puts it right in front of your content, right in the way of everything, right? And because it's absolutely positioned, we have a bunch of different things here. So for example, okay, so now, and I made a mistake in my code. It says 100, which what does that mean, right? Let me save that and just do that again. You'll see the thing move. So it ignores its container, right? This is 100 from the top and 100 from the left of the screen, not the containing element. All right, so that, I think that's pretty important. The other aspect of this is you can use it for things like pop-up ads and then make it go away. So like if you're questioning like, why would I need a display none? Well, it's to get rid of stuff like that, right? So I can make it appear and then I can use JavaScript code to make it go away. And in principle, it's still really there on the page, right? It's just not showing. Display none is kind of useful for stuff like that. So now it's gone. But if I did look at the code, you will see that box is still there, right? That's this one here. Kind of interesting. Absolute positioning, generally, what I tell people is to avoid it because it really makes layouts difficult and breaks things. But I think sticky is useful. Fixed can be useful in certain circumstances, and relative can be useful too. But I would be cautious with all of these positioning elements because there are better ways. Positioning can be done using the top, bottom, left, right in terms of how many pixels away from something is. If you use top and left, it works off the top and the left side of the object. If you use bottom and right, it works off the bottom and the right side of the object. Right. So it just depends on where on the screen you're trying to put it, basically. All right, that kind of covers the content that I missed in that video. So this video ends here. And then watch the next video to pick up the stuff on multimedia and the other stuff that we're talking about.